Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today, we have Megan Neal presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Megan is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during the Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and Legal Aid is not representing you at this time. Megan will go over this in more detail, but please remember to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Megan to get us started.
Okay, thanks, Marissa. Like Marissa said, I'm Megan, and I work at Legal Aid's Greensboro office, and I'm in our government benefits practice, which of course includes Social Security benefits. So I think you're here today because you want to know a little bit more about federal disability benefits from the Social Security Administration. So specifically, we're talking about SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and SSDI, Social Security Disability Insurance. And we are talking about these programs specifically as it relates to adults. The standard for children is a little bit different. I've spoken before on here about the applications and appeals process for these benefits and some of the non-disability criteria. So that's things like work history, income, resources, that kind of thing. You can go check those out on our Facebook if you want to learn more about that. But what I wanted to specifically talk to you today about is the medical standard for disability. So no matter what stage of the application or appeals process that you're at, this is the standard that the decision maker from the government is going to use to determine if you are medically disabled. So something to know is that this is just for what we call initial entitlement claims. So meaning you don't currently have benefits and you are trying to get them. If you do currently have benefits and you're going through something like a continuing disability review, that's going to be a little bit different. And we can talk about that more in a different presentation. So today we're just talking about the initial entitlement claims for disability. So let's get started. So I just want to first read to you the definition of disability for adults that's in the federal regulations. And then we can break that down a little bit more. So the Social Security regulations define disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So what does that mean? So contained within that definition is what we call the 5-step sequential evaluation process, or the 5-step sequential analysis. Basically, Social Security asks 5 questions to determine if you are disabled. They're sequential, meaning they go in order, one after the other. And so we have these questions on the right side of this slide. I'm going to go over them briefly, and then there's going to be a few of these that we're going to go into in a little bit more depth. Um, so first question. Is the claimant, that's you or the person who's applying, engaging in what they call substantial gainful activity? So what this means really is, are you currently working? And if so, are you earning above the income threshold that the government calls SGA, substantial gainful activity? And this is a monthly amount. Um, it changes every year. In 2025, the SGA level for non-blind individuals is $1,620 a month. And for a blind individual, it's $2,700. And again, so this is the monthly amount, and this is also gross, meaning this is before taxes and other things are taken out of your paycheck. You can find the updated SGA levels on the SSA website pretty easily. Like I said, they change every year. So, if the answer to this question is yes, you are working and earning above the SGA level, then unfortunately for this process, the Social Security Administration is going to find that you are not disabled. Um, if the answer is no, you aren't working or you're earning below that level, then the process is going to move on to the next step. The second step, step two, is does the claimant have a severe impairment or combination of impairments that meets the duration requirement? So in this step, Social Security wants to make sure that you have a medical diagnosis from what they call an acceptable medical source. So that's someone like a doctor or a psychologist or someone like that. Um, that the condition at least minimally affects your ability to engage in work-related activities. And the medical condition has to have lasted or be expected to last 12 months or to unfortunately result in death. Um, if yes, you do have such a condition, then the analysis is going to move on to the next step. The next step is step three. Um, does the claimant's condition meet or equal one of the listings? So Social Security has published listings of all these different medical conditions with very specific criteria attached to them. And if you meet the criteria for one of these listings, Social Security is going to find that you meet the medical definition of disability at this step, and then the inquiry stops. So essentially, you would be found disabled for this purpose if you meet a listing. We're going to talk more about what these listings look like, and I'm going to show you an example in a minute. These listings can be pretty hard to meet just because they're I would say severe and specific. So if you don't meet one of these, that's okay. You can still be found disabled. The analysis is just going to move on to the next step. The next step is sort of what some people call step 3.5, or like a secret step, which is that before we move on to steps 4 and 5, Social Security has to determine what they call your residual functional capacity. So the residual functional capacity is the most that you can do based on your physical and mental impairments. And they need to figure this out first because they're going to use your RFC for steps 4 and 5. We're going to talk more about what this might look like in a second. step 4 is, given the RFC that they just came up with, does the claimant have the ability to perform her past relevant work? So essentially, they're going to be looking at your past work and comparing that to your RFC that they just came up with, and ask the question, can you still do that work? Um, We'll talk about that more in a second, but if the answer is yes, you can still do your past work, then you will not be found disabled. So even if you're not currently doing the work, if you can do your past work, you are not disabled for the purposes of Social Security. Um, but if the answer is no, you can't do your past work, then we're going to move on to step 5. And step 5 is considering your medical vocational factors. Can you make an adjustment to other work in the national economy that exists in significant numbers? So considering your RFC and your medical vocational factors, so that's things like your age, your skills, your education, can you do any other work that exists in the national economy in significant numbers? In other words, are there any jobs that you can do on a sustained basis given your physical and mental limitations? And we'll talk about this, how they figure this out more in a second. But if no, if you can't do any other work, then you will be found disabled for the purposes of Social Security. So let's now go into a few of these in a little bit more depth. So step 3, that's a listing step. Um, and Marissa might be able to put a link to the listings in the chat if you want to check those out. But again, these are Social Security organizes the listings into 14 different body systems. So that's things like musculoskeletal, respiratory, mental disorders, immune system. Um, and then each of these 14 systems contains within it several, or most of the 14 systems contain within them several different specific conditions. And then each condition contains several different criteria that you have to meet in order to meet that specific listing. And I'm gonna show you an example. So this is listing 1.15. It's I would say like a pretty common back listing. Um, and we're not going to go into it in depth, but I just wanted to just show you an example of what a listing looks like to make it a little less abstract. Um, But if you look at it, you can see how first they go into the symptoms that they expect you to see, that they expect to see from you in order for you to meet this listing. Then they go into the signs they expect to see. So that's things like muscle weakness, decreased sensation, decreased tendon reflexes. Then they go into the imaging findings they expect to see. So that's going to be what they expect like your MRI to look like. And then it goes into the functional limitations that they expect to see, such as that they expect that you would need to use an assistive medical, a walking device, an assistive device for walking. So that's just an idea, and you can kind of see how in depth it can get. Um, but again, you don't have to meet one of these listings in order to win. Now let me go to the next slide. So I just wanted to go into RFC a little bit more, residual functional capacity. So RFC is an assessment of an individual's ability to do sustained work-related physical and mental activities in a work setting on a regular and continuing basis. Remember that regular and continuing basis means 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, or an equivalent schedule. So we're talking full-time work here. Um, so for RFC, they're going to break down your limitations into exertional limitations and non-exertional limitations. So it's kind of just like a useful way to understand what RFC means. Um, so exertional limitations, those are strength related limitations. So that's things like sitting, how long can you sit for, how long can you stand for, how long or far can you walk, how much can you lift, carry, can you push, pull, that kind of thing. Non-exertional limitations are basically everything else. So that's things like postural limitations, manipulative limitations, meaning hand, so reaching, handling, visual limitations, communication, like hearing and speaking, environmental limitations, like are there certain fumes that you just can't be exposed to? Do you have to have do you have to only be in quiet places? And then, of course, a big one is the mental limitations. That's things like understanding and remembering things, responding to supervisors, maybe staying on task is a mental limitation, um, that kind of thing. So now I wanted to go into a little bit more depth about past relevant work. Um, Remember, so for step 4, they're asking if you have the RFC to perform your past relevant work. If you are able to perform your past relevant work, then they will find, then they will not find that you are disabled, or they will find that you are not disabled if you can do your past work. Um, if you're not able to do your past work, then we're going to move on to step 5. Um, but let's talk about what past work means. Past work is defined as work done within the past 5 years. And so often that will be the past 5 years prior to, maybe if you're having a hearing, the past 5 years prior to your hearing date. It has to last long enough for you to learn how to do it. So it's going to be more than 30 days. So work that you've done less than 30 days is not going to count as past relevant work. So for example, if you just did some training or you're just watching training videos or something like that, that's not going to count for this. Um, and this is why, because of this step, that I mean, it's important to know, like when you're applying for Social Security, they send you all these forms to fill out. And one of the forms they have you fill out is the work history form, and I just put an example of it up here. And this is the reason why this some of these forms and this form in particular is so important to fill out. The way they basically the main way they find out about your past relevant work is what you report about it on this form. So if you look at it, you can see that they're asking all these questions like how long did you how many hours a day did you walk, stand, sit, climb? How much did you lift at the job? These are all questions about what your past work was like. So that's why it's so important to fill out these forms and to make sure you do so completely and accurately. Um, It's particularly going to be really relevant at step 4. So finally, I just wanted to talk about step 5. Um, Remember, step 5 is asking whether the claimant can perform other work that exists in significant numbers in the economy, considering her residual functional capacity and the vocational factors like age, education, literacy, work history. Um, if you're someone who has only exertional limitations, Social Security has to use something called the Medical Vocational Guidelines, also known as the GRIDs, to assess the impact of your exertional impairments on your ability to do other work. This becomes particularly important after the age of 50, 55, 60, because the rules change a little bit and it actually becomes a little easier to be found disabled because Social Security assumes that it's harder to adjust to the physical demands of work as you get older. If your impairments are both exertional and non-exertional, the grids are going to be used more as like a guideline. And if your impairments are exclusively non-exertional, they're not going to use the grids, but they have to do like an individualized assessment. And one way this will happen, if you have a hearing, there's probably going to be someone at the hearing acting as a vocational expert who will testify at your hearing to help the judge determine if there are any jobs that someone in your position can do. Um, And that's it for today. Um, so I hope this sort of demystified the disability standard Social Security uses a little bit. Um, like Marissa said earlier, if you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat. You could also drop in the chat any ideas you have about what kind of topic related to Social Security you'd like to learn a little bit more about. Um, and I also put our contact info up here if you want to give us a call to see if we might be able to assist you with your case.
Awesome. So like Megan just said, if you have a question, you can either put it in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook to see if she can respond to those. I am not seeing any questions at the moment, but we'll wait a few moments here just to see if any questions do come in. All right. Oh, what would you say it takes for SSI to get approved? For someone to get approved for SSI?
So it really depends, unfortunately, because there's often several stages you might have to go through. So there's the initial appeal process. Um, then if that gets denied, you can appeal that by requesting a reconsideration. If that gets denied, you can request an ALJ hearing. I think last month, if I remember correctly, I looked it up, and the current wait times for a hearing alone in Greensboro, I think is 8 months, maybe 6 months. Um, it kind of, the wait times vary with each hearing office. Um, and those other stages, the first two stages, can also take many, many months, maybe 6 months or even more. And so unfortunately, it just really depends on the case and the medical conditions and the evidence that's available in the case.
Gotcha. Well, as I am not seeing any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of us for. Oh, wait, hold on. Go too slow. Oh, nope, just no thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us today with a special thank you to Megan for presenting for us. If you would like to review anything that was discussed today, we have posted a recording of today's event to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available for about 30 days. You can also access this recording at any time on our YouTube page starting next week at www.youtube.com/@legalaidnc/playlist and select the Listen and Learn playlist. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn presentations, such as tenant rights, child custody, Medicaid, SNAP 101, you can do so on our website at legalaidnc.org/clinics. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you. Bye.